Hello and welcome. Hope you all fine. In this video, we will look at the implementation of Skype for Business Enterprise Edition 2015 in a lab environment, taking into consideration high availability design aspects such as SQL AlwaysON, DFS, file share, etc. That is typical in a mid to large size deployment. My name is Girish. I'm a UC consultant and founding member here at Digitech Solutions. Some of the work that we've done revolve around the IP Telephony, Cisco UCCaaS. We do a lot of work when it comes to legacy to strategic platform design, migration, implementation, and consulting services, mostly based around Microsoft Office 365 and Azure. Over the course of your time, we have executed many small projects, and we also executed some of the very large, complex projects as well. As far as this video is concerned, this is a lab implementation of Skype for Business. We'll be starting off with a single pool first. We'll be basing that on Windows Operating System 2016. The backend for this purpose is going to be SQL 2014 AlwaysON. In our next upcoming videos, we'll then show the implementation of the second pool, where we'll be able to talk about things like pool pairing, disaster recovery, and failover. Just for reference, we have this diagram just to give you an idea as to the kind of environment we'll be building. So we have two pools in our two imaginary data centers, one in Amsterdam, the other one in Miami, US. They're going to be connected on the MPLS backbone network, our imaginary MPLS backbone network. This SIP domain is going to be digitech.com. The Active Directory is going to be digitech.local. So this part which is shown in the red rectangle is what we'll be building. The pool components obviously will include the Active Directory. We'll have two file shares. We'll have a front end with the co-located mediation and AV conferencing services. The CMS is going to be hosted on two nodes running SQL backend with high availability features such as AlwaysON. As far as the high-level steps are concerned, this is what we have going. So we'll be first, obviously what we'll be doing is we'll be setting up our Active Directory environment. Then we'll be setting up our other environments that are necessary. We'll be starting off with the file share first. We'll be using distributed file system for providing us with some kind of resilience, fault tolerance, high availability features. The backend then will start to implement the server cluster for SQL. We will then install SQL on node 1 and node 2. We'll enable AlwaysON. Once everything is installed, we'll be turning our attention to then start installing the Skype for Business 2015. We'll then need to add the databases to the AlwaysON group, republish the topology, and then finally perform some functionality check. Just a heads up on the implementation side of things. With AlwaysON, one of the things that we've noticed is there's slightly a back and forth process. So you do something on the Skype environment first, you go back to SQL, you add those databases, come back to Skype topology. So it's going to be a back and forth process, and we're trying to sort of reduce and simplify the complexity as much as possible. But just a heads up on the nature of the implementation in this particular deployment. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to it. So this is the lab environment that we have. So this is on a VM workstation. We've got multiple servers that we showed you in the diagram earlier on. So all the servers that says AMS, they are obviously part of the AMS imaginary data center, and the ones in MIA are the ones in Miami data center. For purposes of this part of the video, we'll be focusing on Amsterdam, so we'll be doing most of the installations in here on the Amsterdam servers. So we do have a domain controller in here, which is Windows 2012. So we do have the DNS and DHCP role installed on this. You can see all the servers that we have in our domain, they're all registered. And then we have DNS set up as well. We only have the .local zone defined. At some point we'll go ahead and define the digitech.com zone as well. Okay, so let's get started. One of the first things we want to do before we do anything, we want to install the certificate services. Let's just do that first. We'll select the web enrollment as well, and all dependent features that are necessary. We have the CD attached as well, which is why we are specifying this path in here to get the installation done a bit quicker. Go ahead and install it. It's going to take quite some time. Okay, the installation was successfully completed, but we have some configuration work that we need to complete, so let's just go ahead and do that. We'll keep the same credentials that we logged in as, the domain controller. We'll use SHA-1. Typically, if you want to have a higher degree of cipher, you can go for SHA-256. But for the purpose of lab environment, SHA-1 is good. Okay, the configuration was completed successfully as well. Right, so that's the part on the domain controller. So let's just go ahead and power up all the servers. Okay, so I've got this sequence of events that we need to do. It's quite a bit, as you can imagine. So we're going to try and break this down a little bit, try to simplify as much as possible. So we've done the work on the domain controller. So let's just go ahead and get started with the file share. So we've got two file shares. The reason for that obviously is high availability. So we'll be having certain folders on both of them, and then we'll be using DFS to tie them together to provide us with the fault tolerance, high availability aspects from these two servers. Okay, so we are on the file share servers. So what we're going to do is we'll create, first things we'll do is to create some folders. So let's just go ahead and create the folder called AMS. Just call it AMS SFP share. We'll go ahead and share that folder as well. We'll keep the same name. We'll give permissions to all of them for full control, since this is a lab environment. In production environment, you may want to sort of tie down the access control for the folders as appropriate. Okay, so we created one folder and we've shared that out on FSH1. We'll do the same on FSH2. The folder name has to be exactly the same. Okay, so we've got folder name AMS-SFP-share on FSH1 and FSH2. Now the next thing we need to do is to install DFS. So we'll go ahead and install the DFS role on both the servers. Okay, so both the servers are obviously domain joined. So let's just go ahead and install DFS on both of them. DFS service is located in the file and storage services under the file and SCSI services. So we'll be selecting DFS namespace and the prerequisites, and DFS replication as well. So we're doing that on the FSH1 server. So let's just go ahead and install DFS on FSH2 server as well. Okay, DFS is successfully installed on FSH1. So let's go ahead and invoke the DFS interface. So if we go in tools in here, you'll now be able to see the DFS management tool set available here. Okay, DFS is now installed successfully on FSH2 as well. So let's just close that, close all the windows. Let's get back to FSH1. So we opened the DFS management window. So first thing we're going to need to do is to add a new namespace. Okay, so it's actually in the background. It did do some checks to check whether this server is a valid server on the domain and whether DFS is running on that or not. The second thing it's going to ask you for is a namespace. Now DFS, there's this concept of namespace, which is like the root folder. So in this case, we're going to give it a namespace. Let's just call it VZ namespace. This is our root namespace under which we'll be having multiple folders that we want to use DFS with. There are two options: domain-based or standalone namespace. Almost all instances are going to be using the domain-based namespace. You have to have a very good reason to create a standalone namespace, but in most cases, typically you would be using domain-based namespace. So let's just select that and go ahead. It returns back saying the namespace has been successfully created. So that's good. So we do have our namespace in here. The next thing we need to do is to tie this with the folder that we want to use. So let's just go ahead and select the new folder. We'll use the same name that we use for the folder, just to keep things in line. Now it's asking me for a folder target, so I'm going to click add. Now here I need to specify the name of the server. These bits do tend to get a little bit confusing. So let's just select FSH01. Okay, so we've just selected this one. We're not going to add additional the second folder at this stage itself, so let's just go ahead and do OK. Right, so it has now created me the AMS SAP share. I'm going to select that, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the folder target in here. This may sound a little confusing, but the way to read it is you first specify the namespace, then you specify the folder, and then you go ahead add the folder target. So that's what we're going to do next. Now the folder target, if you remember, we've got this folder target on, we need to add the FSH2 as the folder targets. So essentially what we're saying is the folder target that we have on FSH1, we're going to be tying that or targeting the same folder on the other FSH file share server. Okay, so once I've completed the folder target, it's going to bring me up this replication thing, because obviously from the point of DFS, it is very important to have both the folders in sync. Hence, we need to have some kind of replication going on between them two. So let's just go ahead and say yes, and we're going to select all the default values that we get presented with. We'll select the primary member as FSH1. Full mesh. Keep everything in default. So it's going to come back and say you have successfully completed replicate folder wizard. Once I click close, it does give me a warning that it's not going to happen instantaneously. It does take a little bit of time, at least initially, for the replication to take effect. So we're not done yet. One of the things that often gets missed out is the namespace server. So we have this folder replicated between the two folders, one on FSH1, the other one on FSH2. But one of the other things that often gets forgotten is that we need to add in this additional namespace server as well. So right now it is just, we have only the FSH1 namespace server. The namespace server on the domain, you can think of it as a guy who actually gives out the name of a server once an application or anybody on the domain asks for it. So his job is only to give out names, basically. Now in this case, it is just one person whose responsibility is to give out names. Now obviously if this person is down, or he calls in sick, or is not well, or is not able to do his job, then the fact that we're going to be having two servers, two folders, that in a way defeats the purpose. So let's just go ahead and add an additional namespace server as well. So we have another guy on our domain who is capable of giving out names. Okay, so let's just say MS. Okay, so that's good now. So we've got this pretty much well tied up. So we have the second guy on our domain who is capable of giving out names. That is the name server. So we've got replication or redundancy at the folder level here itself, and we also have redundancy at the namespace server level. Okay, so now it's time to sort of do a quick test. So before we do that, the way DFS invokes the UNC path is in a certain format. So it first takes the domain name slash the namespace, which in our case is VZ namespace, backslash the folder name. The folder name in this case is AMS. Okay, so we haven't really got any folders right now, obviously, which is why it's showing me blank. Let's just go ahead and create one of the test files. So we'll call it AMS file AMS1 file 1. Okay. So we do have this file in here, and we expect to see that file in here. on the second server as well at some point. There you go. So it was the replication was quick enough, so we're able to see the same file on the DFS on the FSH2 server as well. So that means the DFS is actually performing its job. So you can actually see it from a neutral third server as well via the UNC path, which assumes the name /domain /vz namespace AMS SMP share. Okay, so that's a good indication. So we do have a replication successfully working between file share 1 and file share 2. Okay. So while we are at it, we're going to need a few more folders as well. So let's just go ahead and create a few more folders. We're going to need a few folders for SQL. So we're doing the same thing again. Okay, so we created two folders and given all the permissions on file share 1. So let's just do the same thing on the file share 2 as well. It's very important that you name both the folders exactly the same. It's very, very important. I made mistakes in the past where I didn't name both of them the same, and it does cause quite a bit of problems. So yeah, so let's just try and focus on getting it right first time. Okay, so we have the two folders created on FSH2 as well. Okay, so let's just invoke the DFS management suite one more time and do the same thing again for the SQL shares. We're going to do new folder. AMS SQL share. AMS SQL share, AMS SQL share. Okay, so we've created the SQL share. Now what we need to do is at this point, come at this point, and then add the folder target at this point. Folder target obviously is going to be on the second file share server. So we're creating the AMS SQL share, so make sure that you select the right one. Let's just go ahead through the replication wizard. Okay, that says successful. Okay, so we created the SQL share, and let's just go ahead and create the third one as well, which is SQL witness. We'll keep the name the same as the folder name. The first file share server. So here we're doing the SQL witness. So SQL witness, select the right one. Add the folder target on FSH2. SQL witness. Okay, all successful. So let's just take a look at it from the one of the neutral servers, domain controller. As you can see that it's already brought up the various different shares. Obviously at this stage we don't have any contents on those folders. As we do the installation, we'll be able to reference these two folders that we'll need down the line. Okay, so that's pretty much DFS. Just for interest, if you want to see what it appears on the, if you look at the DFS management suite from FSH2, let's just do that. So all the configurations and everything we did through the DFS management console from FSH1. Now we're just curious to find out what happens if you look at the DFS management from FSH2. Right, so as you can see that all the information that we did on FSH1 is still valid and available on FSH2 as well. And the reason for this is all these details and everything get stored in the Active Directory, which both the servers, obviously, since they're a part of the domain, they do have view to, and that is how they communicate internally between them and keep the information in sync. Okay, so that's all DFS. So the DFS part is done as well. Now we're going to turn our attention to create the Windows cluster so that we can get started with the SQL installation. Alright, so let's just get ahead with that. Okay, time to power up the SQL servers. So let's just do that. Okay, we've powered up both the SQL servers, SQL 1 and SQL 2. We'll go ahead, enable the clustering. So for that we need to use Windows PowerShell. So that's the command for adding the Windows cluster. Let's do the same on the SQL 2 as well. Okay, so the installation is done on SQL 2 as well. The next thing we're going to do is we need to test the cluster. So there's a nice little command here that allows you to do that. Okay, so I need to specify the Amsterdam servers. So let's just select the right servers this time. Let's try again. While it's doing on the SQL 1, you can do that on SQL 2 as well. Normally in a lab environment, it'll not, all the tests may not necessarily pass. But if you're doing so in a production environment, then you should pay special attention to the report that it creates at the end of the command. Okay, so we are now going ahead and creating the new cluster. The PowerShell command for the new cluster is going to be new cluster name. We're going to be specifying the AMS SQL cluster name here. The two nodes, SQL 1 and SQL 2. We'll be assigning a static IP address as well for it, which is 10.0.1.81. Well, now we've created the cluster. Now we have to go ahead and create this the cluster quorum, which is where we're going to be needing to have the file share that we created earlier on. So we've got the command ready. So let's just go ahead, set that command up. The important thing to note here is we don't have to do that on both these SQL servers. We just needed to do it on the first SQL server. Okay, so we've gone ahead, created the quorum file share witness as well. One more thing to do is to create the listener, the all very important listener. So we need to create a DNS entry for this, for the listener. So let's just go ahead and do that first before we forget. So we'll go ahead, create the A record for it. The listener is very important, so you have to make sure that you set up the name exactly the same. Always best to copy paste if in doubt. We also have a static IP address that we've assigned, or reserved I should say, for the listener. We're just creating a DNS A record entry at this stage. We're going to reference it at a later stage. Okay, so all this bit is done. We're going to be focusing on this part here. First, we'll create a specific account for SQL. We'll call it SQL admin. So let's just do that. We'll be creating a domain logon. Okay, let's just go ahead, create that that SQL admin user on the domain. Okay, so we've created the SQL admin in here. So what we'll do now is we'll get to AMS SQL 1, and let's just add that SQL admin user that we created to the local administrator group. While we're there, we're also going to add the two servers as part of the domain local administrator. Okay, let's do the same on SQL 2 as well. Okay, so we've added the SQL SQL logon that we created as part of the administrator group for SQL 1 and SQL 2. We've also added the two servers, the SQL 1 and SQL 2, as part of the administrator group as well. So let's just log out and log in with the newly created SQL admin. So we've logged in with SQL admin and SQL 2, log in with SQL admin and SQL 1. We've logged in with SQL admin on both of them. So we're now ready to install SQL, but before we do that, let's just go ahead and check the failover cluster manager. We just installed that in the previous step, so let's just open up the web GUI and take a look at what it looks like. So as you can see, it has created the AMS SQL cluster. We should be able to see two nodes in here, SQL 1, SQL 2. Okay, so that is our failover cluster manager. Everything looks okay on this front. So so let's just go ahead and get ready for SQL installation. We're going to attach the CD SQL. Right, so that's the ISO for SQL. So attach that to SQL 1. Attach the CD to SQL 2 as well. Okay, so we've logged in with SQL admin on both the servers in SQL 1 and SQL 2 there. So let's just get started. We'll start with SQL 1. Right click and say install. Okay, so let's just get started with the installation. Even though this is always on, we'll select the standalone installation option. Okay, so let's just go ahead with the evaluation. Okay, the validation checks were successful. We're gonna ignore this Windows Update error. Okay, so one of the things we should have checked earlier on was the firewall, whether or not it is enabled. Ideally, we should disable it. Okay, the firewall is turned off in here, so let's just make sure that we've got firewall turned off on the SQL 2 as well, because we logged in with a different logon. Okay, firewall, no issues there. Alright, so it's all exceeded the validation checks again. So let's just go ahead. Full feature installation is the option we're going to select. Okay, so now we have to make some selections in here. So obviously the database engine is the main part of SQL. So let's just go ahead and select that. Also select the SQL Server application. We can select the reporting services. We'll also select the management tools, which will bring in the management studio options. All these details in here, we'll keep it default. So we've selected SQL Server Application and Database Engine. We haven't selected reporting service for now, and we only selected the management studio. Okay, so this page is probably the most important page, where we're going to be defining the named instance. So we have that in our document. It's always good to make this preparation checklist, just so that you prepare yourself better when it comes to those specific steps. You don't miss any important details. So this is going to be the name of our instance, the named instance, and the instance ID as well. So the named instance, we're calling it AMS underscore SQL underscore SFP. I'm going to hit tab, and it's automatically taken the same instance ID as well when I hit tab. Okay, so let's just go ahead, make this automatic, and we need to put in the SQL admin logon that we created. Put in the password here as well. Okay, so now it's asking me for the Windows authentication mode. So we'll add the current user. So there's this option in here that automatically adds the current user. We'll also add in our domain controller. Right, so we added two logons. Directory streams, we're going to keep everything default for the purposes of lab, but this is something that needs to be carefully evaluated as to how we're going to be splitting up the various different database folder directories. Okay, next. Alright, so it's we pretty much made all the inputs on SQL 1. Now we're ready for the install, so let's just go ahead, click install. Okay, it does take quite a long time for the installation to complete. So while it's doing that, let's just swing over to SQL 2 and do the same thing. We'll install SQL on the SQL 2 box. So we have the CD ISO. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do the installation on SQL 2. Okay, let's repeat the same steps on SQL 2. validation was successful on the SQL 2 box as well. Okay, so let's just go ahead. So it's very important to put the same namespace on the SQL 2 as well, since they're going to be part of the AlwaysON group, where they will be sharing the namespace. So having the same namespace on both the SQLs is paramount. Okay, let's just set up those logons. Do the same in here. Current login. Select the domain admin as well as part of the role. Data directories we're not touching. Okay, so the installation of SQL on SQL 2 box is also underway. Let's just go back to SQL 1, see how far it's got. Okay, still some ground to go. So we'll just pause the video here for now. Okay, so just returning back, the installation is now completed on SQL 1. Let's just go over to SQL 2 and see how it is doing. And sure enough, we've got the installation completed on SQL 2 as well. So in summary, we've just completed the SQL build individually on SQL 1 and on SQL 2. So let's just close all of those windows. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is on each SQL, we need to enable the AlwaysON availability groups. So let's just go ahead and do that. To do that, we need to go to the SQL configuration manager, which is here. This is just going to be a little tick that says AlwaysON. Okay, we're going to select this. It says something about we need to restart the service. It says we need to restart the service. So let's just go ahead to that. We'll do the same on SQL 2. Okay, so that is completed. In fact, we need to restart the service, so let's just do that here as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it regarding the installation of SQL. So we do have the SQL Studio. Let's just open it up. We're going to need that quite a bit. Alright, so let's just connect to SQL 1. Okay, so as you can see, it's showing me all the various different um, options. Database, obviously we don't really have any database because we haven't started with the Skype installation as yet. But I can see the availability group option, SQL 1, so you can connect on SQL 2 as well from the same console. Right, so we're able to connect to SQL 2 as well. Okay, so for all practical purposes, I think SQL is now ready to take in additional databases from Skype for Business. The next thing we want to do now is to turn our attention to installing the Skype for Business on the front-end server. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that. Power on the front-end server. We've just logged on to the Amsterdam front-end server with the domain admin. We'll wait for things to settle down. Obviously, the first thing we're going to do is to add the prerequisites for the front end. I've got that string ready here. Alright, so we are on the front end. Okay, so all the prerequisites have been completed now, so it's asking for a restart, so let's just go ahead and restart. Or typing. And now we're going to attach the ISO image for Skype on FE1. It's this one. So let's just go ahead and run the setup. Okay, so let's just get the installation underway. For now, we're not going to check for updates, being a lab environment. Okay, first things first, let's just install the admin tools. Okay, finish. Right, so that's done. Now we're going to start preparing the Active Directory. Starting with schema. We've logged on as domain admin. Firewall is off. Okay, so we look good. Okay, so that is done. Right, so we're now good to progress to the second. So that way we've ensured that the schema has been replicated. In this case, it is just one server. But in your environment, if you have a large footprint of domain controllers spread globally, then ideally you should wait to make sure that all the replication has taken place before you progress to the next stage. Alright, so let's just go ahead and create the forests. The prerequisites are all of this in here. Alright, so that is now complete. Alright, so here we go. So we can see that it's created all those admin groups. So we are fine on that step. We are okay now to proceed further. At every stage that you finish, it's important that you check the progress to make sure that all your application and everything is good. Alright, so I've got the domain status ready, so that's good. I think there's one more step we need to do before we progress further. Yep, this bit in here. So let's just go ahead and add the CS administrator to the domain admin group. So we are now on the domain controller. Double click the administrator group. Okay, so that's done as well. Now we have to do yep, so we need to get the topology defined. So let's just go ahead, bring up the topology and start defining our environment. Strange. Okay, so we're going to be having a new topology here. Today is Friday. Okay, primary subdomain digitech.com, none additional domains. First site, city, okay, we'll open up the front-end wizard. So pool FQDN. Okay, let's just call our pool AMS pool. Now here you have to list the FQDNs of all the front-end servers. In our case, we just have one, but you have to be very careful to make sure that you enter the correct FQDNs. So, alright, so we just have one front-end in the Amsterdam pool. Okay, so let's just select the usual bits. We're not at this stage, we're not going to be enabling any of this. We'll just do a very basic core installation and then grow from there. Let's just say we are okay with co-locate mediation server. We're going to keep this ticked on. No Skype, no edge pool for now. SQL store, this is the important bit, so we don't have anything in here, so we need to define that now. So the most important bit in here, so as you can see, you do have the option of high availability, and the moment I select that, you can see that this changes to the group listener, right? So it is very important that you put in the right FQDN here itself, and this is generally the FQDN of your listener. So you have to be very careful, because if you make a mistake in here, changing the FQDN name is a real pain in the, I shouldn't say that, changing the FQDN is going to be very, very difficult. So let's just make sure that we get it right first time. So we do have a listener in here that we used. So let's just copy paste to make sure that we're not making any mistakes. Okay, we know that it's not going to ping, but we can see that it's resolved the correct IP address. So we are good on the FQDN. Double, triple cross check to make sure that you get this bit right. The next bit that you have to get absolutely right is the named instance. Named instance you can copy paste from here to avoid making any typos. The SQL Server FQDN, right now what we're going to do is we'll put the first SQL FQDN for now. Okay, so we've entered all the values. Double, triple cross check this step. It is very, very, very important. So we all look okay for now. So let's just go ahead. Next is asking us to define the file store. So the file store that we are using is a DFS file store. This is going to be our domain name. Typically in a normal environment where you don't have DFS, you would specify the FQDN of the server that is running the file share. But since in our case we're having high availability, we'll use the domain name first, and the second part is going to be the namespace / folder name. Okay, this web services URL, I'd like to change this to something different. And this will call ms-web. Will not install the Office web app as the part of the basic core installation. Okay, so let's just double check everything one more time. So we've defined our simple URLs here as well. So let's just go ahead, define the Okay, so but before we go ahead publish the topology, let's just create the DNS zone for digitech.com. So we'll call it digitech.com. Right, we need to add in quite a few DNS entries in here, but for now let's just add in meet. Let's just point it to the IP address of the FE 10.1.0.11. So add in the admin. Let's just go ahead and add the link discover record while we're here. Okay, so that's done. Alright, so let's just check the other components in the meantime one more time. This is the very crucial step. We want to get it right as best as we can. If you notice, the SQL store takes the notation, the listener FQDN slashed named instance. We got our file store correct as well. Alright, so everything looks good. It's ready to be published. So let's just go ahead, publish it, see what we get back. Since we're using DFS, we might get a warning saying that the file share is not in the best format, but let's just wait for it to return back. Okay, the topology was published successfully. This is the very important step. It means your front-end topology is able to connect to your back-end SQL server. All the logons and permissions and everything are good. It did, however, give us some warnings that we were expecting. So nonetheless, you should be looking at all the logs and everything. And also, also a good thing to do is it tells you here the to-do list. Depending on what changes you make to the topology, it gives you an output appropriately. So the things it's asking me to do is to add all these entries in the DNS, which we've already done. So we have to update the Skype for Business servers with all the changes that we've defined in the topology by running the local setup. So it also says in here the database listed are not part of the AlwaysON availability group. So we now need to create the new wizard in the SQL Studio before we can proceed any further. So let's just go ahead and do that. So you're going to turn around to the SQL server. And this is the bit I was alluding to earlier on. It gets slightly confusing. You do think that we're going back and forth with the process, and this is just the nature of the installation. Um, so yeah, so we are right now on the SQL 1. Let's just open up the SQL Studio. And in our topology, we selected SQL 1, so we should expect to see the databases in SQL 1. And we're not expecting databases in SQL 2. Connect to SQL 1. Okay, so you can see all these Skype related databases that has been now added to the SQL 1. Let's just connect to SQL 2 and ensure that there should not be any databases because we've not defined that as yet. Okay, so we don't have any databases in here, but we do have databases, newly added databases in the SQL 1. Alright, so now we need to turn our attention to create the AlwaysON availability group. So we can do that in the wizard. So call it AMS SAP AG for availability group. Now we have all these servers, so we have all these databases that are now ready to be part of the availability group. But I can't seem to select any of this. I need to change the database mode before I can proceed further. Thankfully, we can do this using SQL. So I've got all those SQL commands. I've got all those PowerShell commands listed in here just to make it easier. Alright, so let's just open up PowerShell. And since we're logged in as SQL admin, let's just make sure that we run that as the administrator mode. We are getting the databases ready so that they can be added to the replication group. There are a couple of things you need to do before that. This is what we're doing in order to prepare the databases for replication. Repeat the same thing for all the databases. Matter of fact, you can actually select all of them at the same time. So the next bit we're going to do is to take the backup of SQL databases. It needs a backup to be taken before it can proceed, and that's a fairly quick process. Okay, so we've taken the backup of all the databases. We still have to do the same for the CMS database, so let's just do that, the all very important CMS database. The next, so we don't have any monitoring databases as of now, but if we were to have it, then there are additional steps that you need to do for the databases related to monitoring and archiving. Okay, so now if I refresh, now it is in a state where it's allowing me to select all the databases. So essentially what we're doing here is we've added the database on SQL 1, and now what we're doing is now we're defining the availability group, and we're selecting the databases that we want to be a part of this availability group. So we do have the server instance of SQL1 slash the namespace, and now we need to add a replica. The replica obviously has to be on the SQL2 server. We'll select the automatic failover as well here. No changes here, no changes here, but a very important change that we had to do on the listener. Now, okay, so we have to go ahead create the listener name. No matter how small the name of the listener, it's always best to copy paste. Not this. And no matter how simple the IP address, still copy paste. This is a very important step. So that way is it's asking for a port here, so we're going to select the port as 1433. Okay, we've got right, so it's now asking for a shared network drive. In this case, we cannot use the DFS because of the timeout issue. It is basically checking whether if SQL is able to write something to a shared drive, whether SQL2 can access the same drive in that point in time. And because the way DFS works and the timeout issue, that replication may not be instant, as a result of which it does fail. So this is just a validation step. So we'll just point it to the first FSH server. Okay, so let's just take a look at this one more time. So what we've done is we are on SQL1. We are selecting the share as the AMS FSH01. We're not taking advantage of DFS at this stage. Now it's going to go and do the validation steps. It's passed all of them except for one of them, and it does talk about the file structure in the CS data folder. So let's just go ahead and do that using robocopy. So essentially what we're doing is we're copying everything that we have from the file structure in SQL1. We're copying it over to SQL2. This is done using robocopy via command prompt, run as administrator. Okay, so this doesn't take long. Now let's just rerun the validation, and this time it is successful. So it's done some validation to check if everything is in order before it can go ahead attach all the databases to the availability group. The result is clean, so we're now in a position to go ahead with this step. So essentially what it's doing is it's taking the database that we have on SQL 1 and then making it available on SQL 2, and making sure that it is in a primary standby fashion, and it's doing the synchronization between the two servers for all the databases that we've selected. Okay, so everything was successful. It returned the wizard completed successfully, so that's good news. So let's just go ahead, close that. And now let's just open SQL Server Manager and see what it's done. Right, so remember we only saw the databases on SQL 1 and not on SQL 2. Okay, so we now have all the databases being part of SQL 2 as well. So let's just do some refresh. Okay, so the thing to note here is SQL 1, we've got the databases synchronized. All the databases that we selected to be a part of the group has now been replicated across to SQL 2. So that is what we'd like to see. We're not having any errors or anything like that. Okay, so it's saying that SQL 1 is primary and this SQL 2 is secondary. It is showing me a list of all the servers, it's showing me a list of all the databases that are part of the availability group, and it's showing me the listener here as well. So remember, the listener was not pinging earlier on, so let's just go back and see what if it is any happy now. And yes, sure enough, we're getting response back from the listener, so this is excellent news. So the SQL part is done. We've checked the listener is pinging. Now what we need to do is we need to go back to the front end and complete our configuration wizard. So let's just do this part again. So we need to go to our front end server. So over to the front end server. Let's just close the builder. Now let's just go open. We need to open up the deployment wizard. And this is the back and forth thing I was alluding earlier on. So now let's just go ahead and install the local configuration store. Now obviously this step is going to look for your database where your CMS database is going to be stored, and it's going to retrieve a copy of it. It means it should be able to connect to the SQL via the listener successfully, and only if it is successful it will be able to download the topology. If there are any problems at this stage, we have seen errors in the past where for some reasons it was not able to connect to the database. Okay, so let's run this step. Right, so this is very important. It's the test of the system to make sure that it's able to connect to the SQL and be able to download the CMS database. Okay, so that took a while, but was finally completed successfully. And this is another important step in your installation. Right, so now we can just plow on. We can go ahead and install the server components. I have a feeling that I'm missing a couple of things in here. At this stage, I think I'm going to need the couple of prerequisites that are not captured in the original PowerShell prerequisite string. It's going to give me some errors here. It says you must install Media Foundation feature or desktop experience. Okay. Media Foundation. Okay, so it requires a couple of things. One is it needs the Media Foundation, and it also needs the Windows Identity Foundation. Okay, so that's completed. Now let's just rerun this again and see if it complains for anything else that we are probably missing. Okay, so it was complaining on the rewrite module. So I did a bit of search on the internet to come up with ways to address this problem. The simple solution is to simply just rewrite, to install the rewrite module. You can download it from here, and we can have it installed. So we installed it. Now let's just go ahead and rerun the deployment wizard and see if it is happy. Okay, so it completed this time successfully. Didn't complain on any prerequisite it wasn't getting. So the deployment wizard is happy. So let's just complete this step. Next on is our certificates. So since we had installed the certificate authority on our domain controller on the first step, so we're going to request that. Let's just make this up. We're going to select all the subdomains. Let's just view the certificate. So we do have the private key. So now we need to assign the certificate. Let's just do the same for the OAuth token. Okay, so the certificate request and assignment has now been completed. So we are now in a position to start the services. Alright, so before we do that, we've done a lot of installations on front-end one, so even though it's not asking for reboot, let's just go ahead and reboot the server anyways. Okay, so where are we? Right, so we've installed everything on the front end. Now it's time to go back to the SQL again. There are a couple of things that we have to do from the topology builder to point it to SQL 02 first. So let's just do that. First things first, I guess one of the things I need to do is to do a failover. So right now SQL 1 is primary. As you can see in here, SQL 2 is secondary. So I'm going to go ahead and do a failover. This is the always on failover. I'll manually fail over to the second server. Okay, it is completed successfully. Now let's just open up, let's go back to the front end server and open up the topology builder. Okay. Right. So where we first use SQL 01. Now what we need to do is we need to use SQL 02. I guess that should be it. And let's just go ahead publish the topology. Okay, let's look at the logs. Okay, so it's complaining about the DFS file share. In our case, we're using DFS, so this is expected. We're not seeing any other warnings, so I think we should be okay. Okay, so this is now published on SQL 02. So all the databases look good. And now let's take a look at the security logins. Comparing SQL 1 with SQL 2. We do see that a number of security logins are missing at this stage, so we need to run a command to update the database. So let's see what the command is. We need to run this command from the front-end server. We need to run it from Skype PowerShell. Just a note in here, when we are specifying this command, we need to specify the listener FQDN. The listener in this case is now pointing to SQL 2, and it's going ahead and installing all the relevant security logins on SQL 2. Okay, it is now completed. So let's just hop over to SQL 2 and just look at the security logins one more time. Yay, so you can see all the security logins now been created. Alright, we are still not done with all our steps. There's one last step we need to do. Right now, this is still pointing to the SQL 2, so we have to make it a bit more generic. Matter of fact, we have to select the same as that of the listener. So let's just do that. So ultimately, once everything is finished, what it'll look like is your FQDN over here is going to be the listener FQDN, and down below here is going to be the listener as well. So this is pretty much the last step. Let's just go ahead, publish one more time. Okay. All right. So we completed all the necessary steps on front end. We've completed all the necessary steps on the SQL. Now it's a good time to sort of go back to your front end and then check for services. Okay, good. The front end service is started. That's excellent news. Let's just start this response group as well. Okay, very good. All right, all the services seem to have started. Now let's just add a few users. I'll add myself. So we're back on the front end now. So before we open up the control panel, we know that we have to install the Silverlight. No thanks. Okay, so it's prompting me for username password, so it means that's progressed one step further. Let's log in with the administrator. So it's giving me this welcome window, so that's good news. We're able to now log into the control panel. Now let's just enable one of the users for link. Okay, so we're going to be using this user as a test user. We'll try to log in with Girish. But before we do that, we've got another PC in here which is on domain. So let's just see whether Girish can log into this PC or not. Is that obviously since we've not added the user in link, hence it's not auto-populating all my entries in here. So I'm going to sign out from here. And let's just roll back to the front-end server. And let's just go ahead and add the user. user Girish K. Okay, you can see that it's now populated my name in here automatically. And you can see that it's able to log in successfully as well. It didn't ask me for any authentication. So that's about it. So in summary, as you can see, the process is slightly tedious. Apologies, it's a bit of back and forth, but that's just the nature of it. In this video, we just really wanted to bring out the essence of Skype for Business with SQL backend with AlwaysON. We also wanted to sort of use the DFS high availability features. We wanted to show all these different components, how they work together. So that's it for part one. Thanks very much for your patience and staying on for those who did. Part 2 is coming out shortly. Part 2 will be talking about building up the second pool, the Miami pool, how to build it up, and we'll be talking about things like pool pairing, failover, etc. So that's coming up shortly. So that's all from me for now. Thank you all very much. You have a nice day. We will see you all very soon. Many thanks. Bye.